Welcome to the All Facts Matter podcast, where we push back against corporate media propaganda with facts, evidence, and data. I'm Peter, the author of All Facts Matter. Let's begin. Previously, I have said that the inflation signals in the Consumer Price Index were sufficiently unclear as to make the Liberation Day tariffs the deciding factor in whether we would see increased consumer price inflation or not. The Producer Price Index summary data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not alter that ultimate conclusion, but it does offer further hints at some deflationary impulses which will be moving through the economy in April and May. The 0.4% month-on-month drop in the PPI for final demand comes, folks will recall, on top of the 0.1% month-on-month drop in consumer prices per the Consumer Price Index. As the Producer Price Index is generally a leading indicator for the Consumer Price Index, a decrease in producer prices suggests there is a deflationary impulse which will be moving through the U.S. economy over the next couple of months. While the Liberation Day tariffs are still poised to be the deciding factor regarding immediate pricing trends within the U.S. economy, the presence of additional forces, both inflationary and deflationary, still influence the magnitude of any pricing shifts up or down. A quick survey of what the Producer Price Index data holds is therefore in order. While the Consumer Price Index showed a strong disinflationary trend within core prices, the Producer Price Index showed a far stronger deflationary impulse, with deflation printing almost across the board. As noted by the BLS, PPI for final demand showed 0.4% deflation month-on-month, although core producer prices, PPI for final demand less food and energy, remained in disinflation. Producer energy prices were down 1.6% month-on-month. Producer food prices also dropped 1.6% month-on-month. And much to the chagrin of corporate media, which yesterday had focused on egg prices as the only real negative point they could emphasize in the Consumer Price Index report, producer prices for eggs fell 21% month-on-month. Goods prices came down 0.4% month-on-month, and service prices slipped just barely into deflation at 0.02% month-on-month. Of the major producer price categories, only construction showed any rising demand with a 0.4% month-on-month increase. All of these deflationary impulses in producer prices will move through the economy to consumer prices over the next couple of months. The breadth of producer price deflation for March alone suggests that deflationary impulse is likely to be significant. Perhaps more intriguing than the final demand data, however, is the intermediate demand data. Intermediate demand goods and services are those which are consumed at various stages of a supply chain, with the various stages of intermediate demand giving us a price outlook on the various stages of product and service supply chains. All four stages of intermediate demand are showing either outright deflation or disinflation for March. And if we look at the breakdown for intermediate demand in terms of goods and services, we again see the cooling trend cutting across all categories. Processed goods are printing disinflation rather than outright deflation, but the downward trend is unmistakable. If we break intermediate demand down by service category, the cooling trend is still broadly maintained. Only transportation and warehousing for intermediate demand is showing any rising price inflation. While this data does not necessarily indicate the start of a broader deflationary or disinflationary trend, it does indicate that the deflationary impulse will extend past April and into May, possibly even June. While we cannot determine the magnitude of that impulse, the producer price data does indicate that the impulse may be extended over time. The Producer Price Index summary does not mean that the tariffs will be any less impactful on consumer prices or the U.S. economy overall. Nor does the producer price data mean that the U.S. economy is on the verge of a major deflation, such as what is unfolding in China currently. The United States would have to experience many months of producer price deflation for that to be the case. However, what the producer price data does show is that there are some significant downward pressures in prices that have yet to fully resolve themselves within the U.S. economy. These are downward pressures that did not present themselves last month, and there is no reason at present to presume that they will present themselves again next month. These downward pressures are going to reduce any inflationary impact of the Liberation Day tariffs still in effect, including the punitive tariffs being applied against China. The punitive rates on China suggest that the immediate impact of the Liberation Day tariffs will be inflationary. With tariffs of up to 145% being applied to Chinese goods, there seems little chance for those tariffs not to cause an increase in some prices. A 145% increase is far too much for any vendor to be able to absorb entirely. However, the producer price data indicates that at least some of the base prices, even before the tariffs are applied, might be reduced. That would limit the magnitude of the increase on consumer prices for March. This is one more example of the myriad of inflationary and deflationary forces which must be resolved each month to ascertain whether the net effect of all such forces is inflation or deflation. The Producer Price Index summary for March indicates there are a number of forces that will be pushing consumer prices down in April. These forces will necessarily mitigate tariffs pushing consumer prices up. The tariffs are still likely the prime determinant of April consumer price levels. At the same time, we are seeing a number of forces emerge which will tend to reduce and minimize the tariff's ultimate impact. The tariffs are still very much the wild card regarding what happens next with consumer prices in the United States. The producer price data, however, suggests that whatever does happen next may not be as wild as corporate media has been suggesting. And that concludes this presentation. I hope you found this podcast helpful and informative. Please like it and share this with your friends. Word of mouth is how I publicize my work. Please also consider making a one-time donation or becoming a paid subscriber to All Facts Matter. Your support is what keeps this work going, and I greatly appreciate all of my subscribers. Without you, this work would have no meaning. I encourage everyone to be especially generous with feedback. Leave a word or two in the comment section so that we can keep the discussion going and that we may learn from each other. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.